In the classroom, there is no worse look on students' faces than when you announce there's going to be a group project. However, the reality is that working in groups is good for students because when they enter the, quotes, real world workforce, groups are going to be important things for them to know how to work in. In the day-to-day workplace, most decisions get made in groups. But you should also consider that in day-to-day life, there are many groups, from Little League groups to church groups to just volunteer groups that you'll be involved in. Therefore, knowing about small groups and how to work in small groups will help you do better in your overall life. In this video, we are going to explore small groups, what they are, and how communication works to make a group effective or non-effective. So let's get started by defining what a small group is. It's 3 or more people working together, and they're doing so interdependently to accomplish a task. So let's break down the definition a little bit. Let's talk about the size of the group. It's got to be more than 3 members, but most people say that a group loses its small groupness at around 20 people when you can no longer have a relationship with everybody in the group. In small group communication, size matters. Why does it matter? Because for every person we add to an interaction, the communication gets more impersonal. So what does that mean, impersonal? Impersonal means that we start putting up more and more barriers to self-disclosure the more the number of people in the group are. In other words, we're going to filter our communication more the larger the small group. When it comes to group size, research has shown that groups of 3 or 4 people are more productive than larger groups of 5 or more people. But when it comes to determining group size, it's what has to get done or the task that matters and determines the number of people you need in the group. The task of the group is the purpose or the reason that the group exists. It's what the group exists to do. Group members work on their task interdependently. What does that really mean? That means that they cannot achieve their goals without the help of other group members. The task is just simply too big. So what one person does in the group affects the other. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. It's not complete with all the pieces or without all the team members. Communication is key in small groups, and it's what helps a group form, shapes how they communicate, and allows the group to function. Communication is what makes us either feel great in a group and produce a great product, or it can make us feel horrible and never want to be on a group again. If you've been on many different teams that work together over a period of time, you're aware that each group has its own identity, culture, and distinct communication practices. They have their own norms, rules, distinctive practices, and roles that different people play. When small groups are created, they immediately begin to create their own unique group culture. These cultures can be pleasant, empowering, and motivating, and very cohesive, where others can be aggressive, hostile, demeaning, and destructive. The development of group culture starts right away from the first time that group members communicate. They begin to establish norms, which are informal rules for how to interact that are created and sustained through their communication with one another. Basically, norms guide the members' behavior in their group. Some examples of norms in groups are whether or not being on time is important, whether you use formal or informal language, do you use slang or curse words, how hard are you expected to work, what you wear, and how meetings are going to rerun and who's going to be in charge. Most norms are not established directly. That basically means that they're implicit, that we kind of just know what the right way to behave is. When norms are explicit, they are normally rules of how to behave and not necessarily norms established by the group. They can become norms over time, though. Norms in groups develop rapidly. So if you think about any classroom as a group, when people come in the first day, they sit in a certain seat. And from week to week, they sit in the same seat. It's a norm. And if someone moves, we feel weird about it, and we might even ask them why they moved, because they've broken their norm. This brings us to how groups react when their norms are violated. Basically, they police norms or put the group members in their place through feedback, which is basically communication. So in the case of our classroom seat, someone said, "Why are you sitting there?" Or if you're in their seat, maybe, "Why are you sitting in my seat?" Teachers often do this is when they say, "Put your device away." There are 4 main types of norms in groups: performance, appearance, social arrangement, and resource allocation norms. Performance norms are centered around how hard a person should work. So we've all been a part of organizations where 40 hours and you're out, or you're expected to work 60 or 80 hours a week. That's how much we should stay on task and how much we should put in towards the end product or task. Appearance norms basically tell us how we should look, how we should dress, and what our physical appearance should be. So, do we have to wear a uniform? Do we have to wear a suit? Are we allowed to have tattoos showing? Those are all appearance norms. Social arrangement norms tell us how we should interact with others. So how do we interact with our peers versus how do we interact with those in more authority? So these tell us how we should behave towards each other. And at work, they're often centered around the status of the individual. What's their title and where are we in the organization relative to that person? Resource allocation norms are about who gets what. So who has access to more or less, who gets to spend time in certain events, etc. So if we think about the work environment, people might have a bigger or smaller office. They might make more or less money. They might get access to tickets for the weekend versus not getting access to tickets. Those are resource allocation norms. Like other relationships, groups have stages of development. There are 5 stages of development that were developed by Bruce Tuckman in 1965. The 5 stages are forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning. The forming stage of development is the first stage of team development. It's a lot like your first day at college. You're introduced to everyone, you're polite, you're pleasant, everyone's excited to start something new. You may discuss member skills and background, the project goals, timeline, ground rules, and individual roles. This stage is all about people familiarizing themselves with one another, their roles, their responsibilities. It's an important part of the team development that relationships get developed and people understand each role that they play. But because it's focused more on the people than the work, it's not really productive for the overall group's goal at this point. It's really focused on developing norms and climate. In the storming phase of a group, the reality and weight of the complete task starts to kick in. The initial feelings of excitement are worn off and politeness starts to become less. Personalities may clash, members may disagree. There may even question the authority or the guidance of different leaders of the group. This is the point at which it's important to remember that most teams experience conflict. And if you're the leader, you need to remind people of this. Some teams try to skip over the storming stage and to avoid the conflict at whatever cost. But it's usually very dangerous to do this because what happens is the conflict grows and it blows up later. So it's better to recognize conflicts and resolve them early. The third stage is the norming stage, and this is the stage during which people start to notice and appreciate each other's strengths. They start to settle into a groove and everyone is contributing and working as a cohesive unit. If you've reached the 4th stage, pat yourself on the back. You're on the way to success. In the performing stage, members are confident, motivated, and familiar enough with the project that they can operate without supervision. Everyone is on the same page and driving full speed ahead towards the final goal. The fifth and final stage is the adjourning stage. And this is when the project is coming to an end and the team disbands. This stage is sometimes known as the mourning stage because members have grown close and they feel lost at the end of the team and the experience. The norms of the group work to establish the climate or the emotional tone or atmosphere of the group. All relationships, whether they're group or interpersonal relationships, have an emotional tone. They're how committed each other is to the group and how willing people are to go to the mat for one another. Are they cohesive or are they really distinct, separate, and maybe even not hardly together at all? There are three main factors that contribute to develop the climate of a group or relationship. They're trust, supportiveness, and cohesiveness. Trust is basically what you would normally think of. It's whether or not we can rely on other members of the group or in a relationship, the other person in a relationship. When it comes to trust, there's two different ways that trust is developed. The first is task trust, and that's our belief that the other person in the group is capable of doing the job. They can get the work done. They're smart enough and able enough. The second type of trust is interpersonal trust, and that's confidence that the person is for the team, not against the team. They're not for themselves and they don't have hidden agendas. The next factor affecting group climate is supportiveness, and this is how open the group is with one another and how much they care about one another. The final factor that affects group climate is cohesiveness, and that's how attached members are to the group. Would they put themselves ahead of the group, or would they put other teams ahead of the group? Or do they feel attached to the group and they're committed to the group in a way that they would make sacrifices for the group? In general, groups with a healthy climate outperform those groups without a healthy climate. We know that negativeness leads to destructiveness and positive generally leads to a positive outcome. However, there are times when there can be too much cohesion or positive group climate, and it results in what is called groupthink. And this happens when we desire cohesiveness and agreement so much that it takes over the decision making of the group. In other words, in order to be the same and get along, nobody can disagree, and it leads to bad group decision making. Groupthink usually leads to disastrous decisions by groups. Groups become less productive, ineffective, and make really bad decisions. A recent example of groupthink is the BP Deepwater Horizon oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico that occurred in 2010. In this case, workers and management ignored automated warnings from the rig and equipment that came from multiple different systems, and they placed their own decision-making as superior. This resulted in the death of many workers and great damage to the local environment. If you're part of a group that is subject to groupthink, it's often difficult to know that it's going on. Some observable signs are the belief that your group is morally superior to others and that you can't fail, you're better, and you're invulnerable. Also, you tend to start to rationalize bad decisions. You also characterize members of the other groups that oppose you as evil, weak, or ineffective. And when other members in the group suggest that there might be valid points outside of the group or by other groups that oppose you, you censor those alternate opinions, and you put direct pressure on members of the group to agree with the group's decision making. Any group is subject to groupthink, and there's different things that you can do to prevent groupthink from occurring. First of all is seek all information. Make sure that you have all the information you need to make a decision. And then also consider where's that information coming from and what is the credibility of the source of the information. You can also prevent groupthink by having certain members of the group responsible for playing kind of a contrarian role. They're kind of the devil's advocate, and they always try to bring up the counter arguments or arguments against the direction the group is going. Finally, the group should have openness to a certain amount of healthy conflict. Conflict should never be perceived as negative in a group. It should be something that's to be worked through and to be addressed, to allow all opinions to surface and to make sure that everyone is expressing their opinions. Finally, research shows that one of the best ways to avoid groupthink and enhance group decision making is through diversity. These are observable or implicit differences among members of a group. There are two different types of diversity. The first is observable. These will be things that we can physically see, such as ethnicity, sex, able-bodiedness. The second type of diversity is implicit diversity. And these are basically things that aren't very well seen. They have to do with our attitudes, our values, and beliefs. These are our worldviews, perspectives, and other personality characteristics. These are things such as our religious background, our educational background, our family backgrounds. So let's look at some of the research on diverse groups versus non-diverse groups. The research shows that 87% of the time, the diverse group makes a better decision than the non-diverse group. 60% of the time, the diverse group gets a better result than the non-diverse group. They also make decisions 2 times faster and in half the meetings. This research has been replicated over and over, and it shows the importance of diversity in developing healthy groups and making sure groups make good decisions. When we enter a group, we tend to play different roles. But when researchers look at group, they look at 3 different types of roles. They look at task roles, social roles, and individual roles. Task roles are usually behaviors that help the group achieve its goal and accomplish its work. You might initiate a discussion, you might give your opinion, you might evaluate or summarize information for the group, you might coordinate information for the group. These are all different examples of task roles. The second type of role in a group is the social role. And these roles basically help establish the emotional health or the group climate. So these are behaviors that help manage relationships by how we're going to treat one another, or how we're going to support and harmonize together, how we're going to relieve tension in the group, or how we're going to show solidarity. The final type of role is the individual group role. And these are basically behaviors that detract from the group and focus attention on the individual. So it might be withdrawing when you don't get your way, or blocking a decision, or seeking status or recognition for your efforts in a way that takes away from the group. These are very self-centered group actions. When it comes to groups, there's certain behaviors that change. Remember, we talked about the group size, and our communication becomes less forthright, and sometimes we do things that are good for ourselves versus the group. This brings up ethics in groups, and what does an ethical group member look like? First of all, an ethical group member is willing to share their perspectives. Sometimes when we get in a group, we get scared to speak up, and we might disagree, but we don't share our opinion. So as a group member, it's important that we do share our opinion, even if it's a little bit scary. An ethical group member is honest and truthful. They don't lie or shade the information that they bring to the table for the group. An ethical group member tries to remain unbiased against even other members of the group or any of the information being shared in the group. They try to keep an open mind to all the different alternatives and evaluate information thoroughly. They also are willing to engage in conflict and disagree, but they handle it in a way that tends to be positive to the climate of the group. They don't just basically take their marbles and go home. They're willing to engage to work through the conflict to a better overall outcome for the group. My hope is that all of you one day will be leaders of a small group, whether you're the assigned leader or you take on the leadership role as just part of your normal role in an organization. If you ever find yourself in a leadership role, here are some things you can do to help create a positive climate in your group. First of all, celebrate success. Find ways to take advantage of major milestones in the group and let everyone know that they're appreciated. When choosing members for your team, create that diversity in the group, whether it be outwardly observable or differences in how people think about the world. Attempt to diffuse stress. If things start to get uptight in the group, do things that try to bring the group together. Do a group outing or some type of event that allows the group to express some humor and diffuse some stress. Keep the group environment respectful. Make sure that communications are not derogatory and that everyone in the group treats everyone respectfully. Build cohesion in the group by setting group collective goals and keep track of them and put those goals in the forefront so everybody can see success and how you're doing. Be generous in giving pats on the back. Make sure that different members of the group know the value of their role. Even if they're not always the one out front, make sure they know and understand that they're an integral part of the group. Handle conflict in the group. Don't let it simmer. Don't let it grow into something big. Handle conflict in a positive, constructive way when it's minor so that it doesn't grow into an evil monster. If you practice these skills, you will become a great group leader, and your small group will outperform others. As we move through the remaining part of the semester, we will be talking about leadership, power, organizations, and stay in this group context. There's so much to learn, and it's all really fascinating. But for today, we're done, and you've learned just a little bit about small groups and why they're important and how communication interacts in these groups. I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you in the next lecture.